So, welcome again by Daiko Reviews, and it's game comparison time again, and this time it's an old Schwarzenegger arcade game. It is Terminator 2 Judgment Day, but the arcade version for various home systems. And this game was very popular in the early 90s in the arcade with its big cabinet and its two Operation Wolf style guns. And it was, well, a really nice on-rail shooter with digitized graphics and digitized speech samples. It was quite an impressive game for the time, and it was ported to many different home systems, including the Super Nintendo, the Game Boy, Game Gear, Master System, Mega Drive, Amiga and even MS-DOS. Sadly, I do not have all of those versions, but I can show you 4 of them, and that is the Super Nintendo version. I bought this one about 20 years ago in 1998, I think it was, in a sort of computer convention in Enschede, and it was in a sort of tennis court building, sort of sports hall in the Westerbrink area of Enschede Zuid. So and I have this version for years, and well, yeah, it's quite a nice version, pretty good graphics, really good arcade conversion. And then about, well, maybe 9-8 years ago, I bought this version around, I think, 2009, 2010, and this is the Sega Mega Drive version, and this is one of the few games for the Mega Drive that actually supports the Menacer. As you know, the Menacer was Sega's ill-fated attempt at creating a Super Scope type light gun, and only a few games supported it, and that was Sega's own 6-in-1 cartridge, and then some obscure really rare game, and well, this game. And yeah, that's about all she wrote for the Menacer, but yeah, this version I think is quite decent considering some limitations of it. I think the graphics are probably this version's weakest aspect, and that's not really so much in the detail but more in the color palette. Terminator 2, the arcade game, really has a really dark, gritty sort of color scheme in the original arcade version, something that most versions seem to capture quite well, except for this version. Then we've got the version for the Game Boy, and yeah, I acquired this one recently, mainly for the purpose of this review. And the Game Boy version, well, I can be very brief about that one. It's pretty horrible. Yeah, as you will see a bit later, it's not that great. And then we've got a really special one, and that's this one. Yeah, it looks like the Mega Drive, but it isn't. This is the Sega Master System version, and this was also released on the Game Gear. The Master System version, I think, is quite a nice conversion considering the fact that it's on an 8-bit system. However, be aware, this Sega Master System game is quite rare. I bought this one on eBay from a seller in Germany, and well, it had cost me a pretty penny. But there's a much cheaper way to get this game, and that's the Game Gear version. Yeah, the Game Gear version is actually quite common and relatively cheap, and it's pretty much the same game except that the graphics are a bit zoomed in and a bit cropped. The Master System version looks a bit more zoomed out and has a much wider playfield, but other than that, it's pretty much the same game, made from the same source code, the same assets, yeah, just with a different sort of aspect ratio. So I would say let's take a look at the 4 different versions, and after that we'll jump to the conclusion to see what I think about them.
The first game in line is the Sega Master System version. This game is quite rare for the platform as it was a late release. The Master System version was also released on the Game Gear, which is a lot more common and easier to find. Both versions are mostly the same, except that the Master System version has a bigger playfield which affects the gameplay a bit. It makes the game a bit easier. The difference in playfield is quite noticeable compared to the other versions, as in the Master System version you've got more room and are less likely to hit a human whilst shooting on an endoskeleton that hides behind a wall. Compared to the SNES version, the Master System version is more forgiving in that regard. The graphics are quite good for an 8-bit game. They capture the mood and atmosphere of the arcade original quite well, unlike its Mega Drive brother, who's got a strange color palette. The sprites may be smaller but still have sufficient detail in them, and the coloring is nice too. Along with the music that uses fast arpeggios, which are so characteristic for chiptunes, the game sets the right mood. This version of the game is also the easiest, and the only one with a difficulty select mode, which is a welcome feature that the other versions sadly lack. I personally quite like this version, it's decent and way better than the Game Boy version. Next is the Mega Drive version. It's one of the few games that support the ill-fated light gun accessory, the Menacer. This version has quite a few differences compared to the SNES version. It lacks the detail and digitized sprites of the arcade original, something that the SNES version handles quite well, but the Mega Drive doesn't because of its color palette limitations. The developers instead choose to go for a more traditional pixel art approach. And they did a reasonable job, except for the color choices. The first level in particular looks quite off with its bright orange and light blue color scheme. Somebody should have a go at doing a ROM hack to set the colors straight. I'm sure it can be done. Other Mega Drive games have dark colors, so why not this one? It just doesn't look right to me, considering the SNES and the 8-bit Master System and Game Gear versions do this right. The gameplay is all there, and it's nicely executed too. It plays well with the right pace and feel. This is definitely a strong point of this game, quite opposite of the graphics. I prefer this one over the Super Nintendo version. There is a bit more room on the screen, so you are less likely to accidentally hit a human in the first stage. The third stage, however, is just as difficult on the SNES, something that was considerably easier on the Master System version. The music is a real treat. Probably one of the best aspects of this version. It blows the SNES version out of the water in terms of composition and arrangements. The only thing that is somewhat lacking is the speech samples. The music was made by Matt Furness, who is a Sega god in chiptunes. Overall a decent version if you can live with the weird color palette. Here, the Game Boy version. Let me be short, this version sucks. It has no in-game music and it just feels like an Atari 2600 game. I know that the Game Boy is not the ideal platform for this game, but still I feel the developers approached it all wrong. It was coded by a different team than the 8-bit Sega version. To sum it up, if you want to play Terminator 2 the arcade game on a portable system, play it on the Game Gear. Enough said. Luckily there is a much better Nintendo version and it's probably the most authentic, true to the arcade version out there. It's the SNES version. This one looks the part, sounds the part and plays the part. It goes all out on digitized graphics and speech samples and it can be played in no less than 3 different ways. Controller, mouse and Super Scope. Absolutely brilliant. This version brings the arcade experience home, but with that also arcade difficulty. The biggest gripe that I have with this version is the relative small playing field. The sprites can both be quite big as well as very small. This leads to some unfortunate situations in the first stage of the game where the endoskeletons are walking behind the wall where your human companions are hiding against on your side. It's too easy to accidentally hit them and get penalized for causing human casualties. The third stage is also notoriously difficult. I just can't seem to get any further beyond this point. The truck always explodes and I just don't know the right pattern or strategy here. In the Master System version it's enough to rocket launch the flying hunter killers and you can safely ignore the endoskeletons, at least on easy difficulty mode. The game just has some unfair aspects to it that reveal its arcade origin. The overall presentation of this game is very good. It is as close to the arcade as you can get on a home system circa 1992. The SNES's abilities are just enough in terms of sophistication to do it in a convincing way. If you have a Super Scope or the mouse, give them a try if you want something a little bit different than the controller. It can be a whole other challenge in its own right.
So that was the 4 versions side by side. At first the Master System version, which I think is really awesome, considering it's, well, a digitized, somewhat photorealistic arcade game shrunken down to an 8-bit format and still manages to capture the atmosphere of the arcade game. I mean, how awesome is that? It has the right sort of gritty color scheme with the dark colors, and it has pretty decent tunes. I really like this version. Then there's the Sega Mega Drive version. I like the music and the gameplay of this version. The graphics, yeah, they're definitely not as good as the Super Nintendo one. It's not really in the detail, but mainly in the color palette. I personally think the color palette is all wrong in this version. Why is everything so bright and orange? This game is supposed to be dark, and if the Sega Master System and Game Gear version can show how it can be done, then why not the Mega Drive version? What were the artists thinking? Other than that, it's a perfectly fine game, except for, yeah, the color palette. I don't like it. Then the third game was the Game Boy version, and I think that game is absolutely horrible. Why did they even bother? There's no background music in it, the sound effects are annoying, and it looks like a bloody Atari 2600 game on a system that is, well, supposedly much more capable. So yeah, why did they bother? And then finally the Super Nintendo version, which is, well, probably the best, most true to the arcade conversion, with the best graphics, the best sound. It has all the speech samples of Arnie. Overall, I think that's an excellent conversion and one that is really true to the arcade. So I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.